Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I bring apologies from the headmaster at Dubai College, Mr. Peter Hill. He is actually in London. A couple of days attending the COBIS conference, then a couple of days visiting our sister schools in the United Kingdom, from whom we have already learned much and from whom we hope to learn so much more. He's rounding that off with the final recruitment interviews on Friday, and he's back at school on Sunday. Colette is one of the assistant heads at Dubai College, and her speciality area is monitoring and assessment and learning and teaching, and she worked very, very closely indeed with Mr. Hill on the documentation that was necessary for us to achieve this British standard. For my part, I've been at the college now for 23 years, so I'm in my 69th and last term, and since the inspections were introduced, what I tend to concentrate on at this time of the year is school policies. So putting the school policies together, plus the teaching and learning aspects, that gives you the full packet. I hope you enjoyed lunch. I know that as teachers we are very bad listeners because we're so used to talking. So what I really wanted to begin with was to ask you what you expected to get. What, in being here, what are you hoping to get?
Outstanding practices.
Yeah. Your outstanding practices. Outstanding practices. There is another aspect to that as well. It's not so much outstanding practices, but how do you convince your inspectors of the outstanding practices? And so one of the things that we are hoping to do this afternoon is to give you a resource and a toolkit that you can refer to. So if you, in your own context, have a use for this material, then basically you can just pull onto the Dubai College website and know where to find various bits and pieces. Anyone with any other objectives? At that point, I think I'd like to hand over to Colette.
Okay.
Take my jacket off if I may.
Well, when we initially decided, or the headmaster decided that he wanted to get a British Schools Overseas accreditation, we thought it was going to be incredibly onerous. But one of the key things that we needed to consider was meeting the British standards. And they are really quite rigid in what they expect. So if you are thinking of inviting a British overseas inspection to your school, there are certain criteria you have to meet. And I think that the key criteria is here, and this is what you really want to focus on. Are you compatible with an independent school in the UK? Is your ethos, is your curriculum, your teaching and care for pupils, is that as they would find or expect to find in a UK independent school or the UK system? You also have to consider the characteristics of the education. And so the first thing we considered is, well, do we do this? Are we eligible for this sort of inspectorate, for this accreditation? Obviously we are. We have tried to create a wonderful British education for mostly British students for over 35 years. And some of the things that we then did to sort of prove to ourselves or to consider what makes us British and consider our Britishness. We are 60% British students. We are now on 95% British trained British staff, British trained staff, British qualified and British experienced staff, and that's both in our teaching and in our administrative staff. The only exception to that might be our linguists, who are not necessarily trained in the UK. We follow the British curriculum. At Key Stage 3 we adapt it, sort of tweak it a little bit. We do GCSEs and A-levels. Most of our students apply to British universities, at least on average 85 to 90% of them return to university in the UK. And we essentially track and monitor ourselves against British standards. So we will use Durham University, their CHEM Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring. We track ourselves against independent schools. So we are meeting those sort of Britishness standards. And so what we needed to do then is think about what are they going to expect us to do that the KHDA doesn't expect us to do every year. So originally we thought we might have to have revolving sort of notice boards and things like that, one with, you know, Dubai culture and the other with British culture, but we didn't have to go down that route. A couple of the key differences, if you are considering, and that was our brief. Our brief was that people in this room might be considering a British inspection or inviting the BSO over to accredit it. One of the key differences is when you're looking at it, you have to meet their standards. And it's not necessarily you're an outstanding school or an unsatisfactory school, but are you meeting the standards, and are those standards in place? So they are either fully in place, partly in place, or not in place at all. The KHDA form for self-evaluation, if you ever have to fill it out, and I have to fill it out every year, is really, really onerous, really long. The self-evaluation form for the BSO inspection is not so onerous. It asks essentially, where can we find the evidence? So instead of showing and detailing your attainment, your progress, etc., you can say you can find this on the intranet, or you can find it in certain areas. The key thing and the key differences then came from the teaching and learning is all the same, the attainment, the progress, all of the same things that KHD and the DSIB inspect are exactly the same. The key differences though are quite important, and for us what we considered was, can the students re-enter the UK system? If a year 7 student leaves, can they get into a similar school? Are they equipped, and will they be able to cope in the UK system if they have to re-enter? There's a lot of differences in policies that you have to produce. There's a significant difference in preparation beyond the academics. So I'll just talk you very briefly through these. Martin's going to talk you through these policies to parents. Yeah?
Okay, just a couple of things there. What's the date today? 15th of May. Dubai College was established by Emiri decree by the late Sheikh Rashid on the 15th of May 1978. So Dubai College is 35 years old today. So it's taken us 35 years to get to this point. The other magic buzzword that leapt off the screens to me there was the word independent. Independent schools in the United Kingdom. Before I came to Dubai College in 1990, I had worked for 18, 19 years in the state sector in the United Kingdom. And the independent sector was somewhere up here, and I was teaching in Grotty Road Comprehensive School, which was sort of down here. And so coming to Dubai was a real culture shock. So why are the UK government saying that, yes, we could recognise you as an overseas school, and then benchmarking it against independent schools, against the better schools, in inverted commas, in the United Kingdom? Well, of course, it's all to do with the funding, isn't it? Independent schools are privately funded. So that's the reason I'm presuming why they actually go down that particular direction there. The other thing that I wanted to come on to here was the resource and the toolkit that I mentioned to you is our website. So basically, the website is down here, as you see, www.dubaicollege.org. And when you get onto the website, this is what you will find. The documentation that Colette was referring to, this is it. This is it. And I think, Colette, we can get this, they can get this by clicking on that link?
Yeah, there's a link on the PowerPoint. So.
Okay, so what this is the British Schools Overseas Self-Review Form. And basically it's a comprehensive document, and it's back to ticking boxes. There are lots of boxes to tick in here, and many of the things that I'll show you in a minute are a result of what's in there. Colette, if you go to school policies, information for parents, school policies. Okay, now most of the policies, here we are, they came up very quickly. Most of these policies are specifically mentioned as requirements. Is there a written, published policy on cyberbullying? Well, it's on actually bullying. So is there an anti-bullying policy which is in writing for prospective parents to see, members of the general public to see, etc., etc.? It needs to be available. We thought availability, we'll put it on the website. The top one there, sorry, the third one there, acceptable use of Dubai College ICT systems. We wanted to get a message through to parents that we wanted to move over to electronic communication. So we thought, well, one way of doing that is to actually include it in as many of our contacts with outside agencies and with parents as possible. So that's why that one's there. But all the others are aspects of what it actually says must be in writing and must be available to parents in here. So the cyberbullying goes with the anti-bullying, child protection policy, health and welfare and child safety, a published complaints policy, a published and phased complaints policy. What happens if the parent rings up the school, makes a complaint and doesn't go any further? Can they put the complaint in writing? If they put the complaint in writing, it moves from an informal resolution to a formal resolution. What happens if they're still not satisfied when they've made their complaint in writing? Is there a court of appeal? All this sort of thing needs to be spelled out. And if you click on one of those policies, you basically get the details. Curriculum policy is there. Mobile phone policy, that's not the UK government asking for this. That's us putting it on there as a new policy for this academic year. The curriculum policy is there, but they are all there and available to you. The one on which we worked hardest is this one, the child protection policy. The child protection policy. We knew that we had only local experience of child protection, and to be quite honest, we knew that this was an area where we would have to go looking, in a sense, for business to come. So the way we decided to tackle this was to actually bring out from the United Kingdom a major expert in this area. So it required a certain amount of capital investment up front. So we hired for a couple of days a man that works for an organisation called Kidscape, and he came to Dubai College about 12 months ago now, and basically the end of that result was, at the end of our child protection policy, we have got a list of some 50 staff who have done the child protection policy criteria up to level 1, and the more senior staff, about 20 people that have taken it up to another level. If you're interested in costings of that, I can actually show you the costings, and we can work out some sort of estimate, as it would be today. So, preparing for the child protection program, a gentleman called Robin Watts came out from the United Kingdom. We recruited him through the fact that he'd been lecturing and presenting on just this topic in front of head teachers from the United Kingdom, head teachers who were in the United Kingdom from overseas school. So as a result of seeing him perform there, basically that was the reason why we invited him to Dubai. Very easy process, very approachable man, easy to deal with, could put you in contact with him, still in touch with him, even though it was 12 months ago that he came. The child protection is an area that is changing rapidly. Obviously there's a local dimension to this. You may remember the sad case that was in the paper earlier about Wadima and Wadima's law, which is basically now being put in place in the Emirates. It's not instrumental yet. We've got nothing like the social services and the attendance ladies and so on that we have in the United Kingdom, but Dubai is moving towards that type of situation. All of that is basically covered in that area there. And I think that caption actually summarizes all that I have said. You have talked about local context there at the end. So that's something that we may want to look at in a little bit more detail in a moment. This is also a very important aspect of the work that we do. Are we recruiting the right staff? Are we safeguarding our students by looking at the applicants for jobs sufficiently closely enough? I know that Colette has been involved in this perhaps more closely than I have.
I think importantly, whilst we all do checks and we all screen, it is a standard that has to be met for a BSO inspection, and so everything has to be accounted for. Every single member of staff needs to have a CRB check, and whether or not you have that in place in your own schools. We went through an entire process of rechecking everyone And it wasn't as onerous as we had originally thought, simply because we are a member of COBUS, and we were able to work through COBUS, who essentially organised everything. And for each member of staff, it cost £55. So they send you the paperwork to fill in, you fill it in, and they get back to you. And it usually takes 3 to 4 weeks. I think the key thing here as well, which we didn't realise at the time, was once you go through these CRB checks, you then have to have a policy in place in terms of how you deal with anything that arises. So, for example, you know, a current teacher from the UK who is 16 and has an ASBO, are you not going to employ them simply because of that? So, as a school and with your board of governors or your management team, you need to decide what you are going to do if something arises within a CRB check. That has to be a policy, it has to be documented, and the principal of the school is the only one privy to those CRB checks. Members of staff, I received my clearance, but the principal received it separately before me. So as a school, they have to be secured, they have to be documented, they have to be carried out, and you have to show the BSO that you have a policy in place in terms of what you do should anything arise. That's not true, obviously, for non-British staff. If your staff are not British and they're not recruited from Britain, a local or a home country check will suffice. But if your staff are British and British trained and British experienced, you're going to have to show to them that you are meeting the same standards as is expected in a UK school.
And that applies not only to the teaching staff, that applies to people who may come in to help with games coaching, or who may come in to run a yoga class for the girls. Basically, anyone that comes through the door and is allowed into Dubai College past the front desk is someone that needs to have the vetting process, because of course there is a risk to children, there's a risk to youngsters from people who are coming into the school that are not members of the normal teaching staff. Obviously there are the transport arrangements with regard to the buses, which is falling under the RTA and their aspect of it. But basically the safeguarding includes the safeguarding of the child from every adult that they are likely to meet in the school. Not necessarily teaching staff. Not necessarily teaching staff.
In addition to some of those policies, that the two key differences we found were the child protection and the CRB checking to meet those standards. It was long, it was arduous, it was incredibly important that we did that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to take fully in place the standard. Have we met the standard? Yes, the standard is fully in place. In addition to that, there were all sorts of different types of policies and the publication of policies that we didn't sort of ordinarily do. Some we did ordinarily do. But for example, you know, details of the school, details of the Board of Governors. Do parents, does the wider community know the name of the chairman of the Board of Governors, and are they able to contact the Board of Governors? Have you publicised your exam results? Do your parents and wider community know the academic performance of the students in your school, statistically and historically? We had publicised that, but it's not common to all schools. Not all schools do that. Again, the complaints that Martin talked about, but also your staff details, are they on your website? Are their credentials there? Can they be contacted via a sort of a general number? So I think it's important when looking at the self-review form, that when you come to a sticky point and think, well, do we actually do that? Look at it closely, because it was really only when we were doing that we thought, well, yes, we have this, but we haven't got it publicised anywhere. We haven't got it on the website, or we don't have this. You know, we don't tell our parents who the chairman of the Board of Governors is. So if you're looking through the review form, look very carefully so that you make sure that you tick the boxes, isn't it? It is quite ticky boxy in this instance.
When we have an inspection, what normally happens is that I put together the school policies. This just happened to be one that I pulled out at random. That's the CRB one. A more current one here is, this is our rewards policy. And over the years, they have grown. I think we're above 50 individual policies, of which about a dozen of them are actually on the website because they needed to be there in order to satisfy the British Schools Overseas edicts with regard to that.
The inspection then itself, as I said, I deal with a lot of sort of pre-inspection bits and pieces, producing the paperwork, producing the data, presenting all the evidence, and was quite worried that I would have to duplicate and sort of put a different slant on the types of information that I usually present to them. That didn't happen. So barring the extra policies that had to be publicised, the process of the inspection pretty much was exactly the same as before. There were many more people. At one stage we had 11 inspectors swarming around the school, and the Majesty's Chief Inspector overseeing all his inspectors. But it was exactly the same in terms of the amount of meetings, what they did. There was a wider spread, there were more of them. They shared the information, so whereas in previous inspections, an inspector might have stayed for 20, 30 minutes, they were staying entire lessons. The meeting schedule was the same, but it did feel like one inspection. You didn't have to necessarily produce anything different, and when they were there, they got on with their business, and to be honest, they were incredibly courteous, diligent, and determined to make it work because it was a precedent. It's the first time that it had been done, and so they were probably as anxious as we were to make sure that it did work seamlessly, that everything knit together. And do you have any other observations?
I think they were very, very professional indeed. I think if the 3-day inspection, I think if you'd talked to us after 2.5 days and basically said, how do you think it's going, we would have all said, we have no idea. It could be bad news coming up. They were totally professional. They were not discourteous in any way, but basically they didn't say, oh, this is a wonderful school, or I've just seen the most wonderful lesson. They were totally professional and inscrutable until we went along to the meeting and basically sat down. They went through all the criteria, and yes, some were very, very good, some were outstanding, etc., etc. And then eventually they came to the final decision, the final recommendation, and they said, congratulations, you are an outstanding school. And that was the first time, I think, that they had dropped their guard, that basically up to that point in time, that they had not said, this is good, this is bad. They had really just looked. They had inspected. So I think they were very professional. Whether they were the professional first team or not, I'm not quite sure. But basically, it was slightly more frosty, I thought, this time.
Yeah, they were
but
very,
totally professional.
very
Gave nothing away.
poker-faced, but courteous. And so, I mean, obviously then, reflections after, the debrief, as Martin said, was the same. What did we gain from it? Well, we gained accreditation as the British Schools Overseas, and an outstanding accreditation at that, which is marvellous. It was a great testament to the staff and to the students and the whole community, parents as well. It allows our students a more fluent transfer should they have to return to the UK or any other British school, which is superb for them, because sometimes there's a misconception about what we do out here. And so getting them into good independent schools anywhere else in the world, that allows it to go ahead more easily. For our staff as well, going back to the UK, as a lot of them do, or some of them do, they're coming from a British school which has been rated by Ofsted as outstanding, so it gives them the kudos, the sort of the professional integrity going back to the UK, which is incredibly important. It will allow us to employ newly qualified teachers because now we have a DFE number, we are able to employ and to put newly qualified teachers through their probation if we wanted to go down that route. It lasts for 3 years, which does mean that you have to do it again every 3 years, but I suppose better than every year. But there are significant financial costs. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the exact costs, but KHDA have partnered with CFBT, and so we had an option. We could have gone to Penta or to a different group, but because KHDA partnered with CFBT and said that they will combine the inspection, we went down that route. Not entirely sure of the cost, but it is in the thousands of British pounds that the school has to pay. Plus your CRB checks, plus the costing, if that's the route you need to go down of your child protection, etc. So financially there are cost implications, and they're going to be renewed every 3 years. Obviously not the CRB and the child protection, but the actual cost, the hardcore money of the inspection is in the thousands of pounds.
Let me clarify for you the cost with regard to the child protection element of this. And one of the things that I'm conscious at the time, about £2,000, about 12,000 dirhams. And that includes airfares, that includes the fee that is charged by the Kidscape organisation. That would include hotel accommodation as well. So in the region of £2,000 this time last year for that course. And I said the great advantage is that for 2 years all our form teachers are child protectioned, whatever that means, in terms of the policy that we've got here. I think we need to shut up and see what questions come from the floor. Yeah.
Hi. Would you say that the PSL accreditation is mainly for people and children and other stakeholders who are English? What about schools like ours, where non-English people would like their children trained under the British curriculum? We do have British trained teachers, but not necessarily teachers who would want to go back to England and teach, or children who would go back to England and study.
Yeah, so you're looking at the quality of your curriculum there, and your curriculum choice. Well, this is the key here. What they're looking for is how well you would transfer. So if you don't want to transfer, you need to consider whether you want to undergo a British school accreditation. This is exactly what they want in place. So unless you're going to transfer, or unless it is about your academics, if you want accreditation to show within the community that you are following and being outstanding in the delivery of your British curriculum, then it is worthwhile, because they do exactly the same as the DSIB do. They look at your teaching, your learning, your progress, your attainment. They rate it. They look at how well you care for your students, their welfare, their safety. It's exactly the same thing. The only difference is then at the end of it, they put a sort of a Union Jack on and a British stamp on, saying yes, this equates. So if it's for your own personal development as a school and the rigor of your school, well then yes, it's worthwhile. And it doesn't matter if your kids are from anywhere in the world or going anywhere in the world. This is your chosen curriculum, and you want to be accredited and see how well you're doing there, then it would be worth it.
And if we don't decide not to?
There's no difference. You're undergoing a KHDA inspection every year.
How compatible are the two, KHDA, PSO?
Very much so, apart from the two big things that we talked about today, the CRB checking, and a lot of it's bureaucracy. The rest of it's core sort of educational philosophy, isn't it?
Something else.
to ask a question, and I really don't mean to rain on your parade, but I think when people came here and the first thing you asked, what do you hope to gain out of this presentation? And I heard 1 or 2 or 3 people say how to achieve an outstanding. But I think the gist of today's talk has been more on how you achieved an outstanding as a BSO.
Yes.
Whereas I'm sorry, but whereas when I walked in here, it stated how we achieved outstanding in the joint DSIB BSO inspection.
Yeah.
So would you like to give us a DSIB perspective of what they did? Because you mentioned both the things.
They did exactly as they've always done. We worked with the KHDA and DS or the BSO in terms of the preliminary, the working together. That you have to apply to DSIB to say we want to undergo a joint inspection. In the preparation, it was a preparation in isolation. So all the preliminary form filling that we do for the KHDA, that goes on. Alongside that, you've got the BSO form filling, and then they come together on the day. The 2 teams, they work outside of it. The 2 teams come together on the day. They triangulate, they go in and share evidence and speak to each other. When you're having a meeting, it will be with the BSO inspector and the DSIB inspector. They will both grill you and interrogate you. But ultimately, it was one inspection, if you understand. Now, our brief in being here was to talk to people about the process. So if you thought something different, we were briefed and we were asked, can you tell people about the process behind this, as opposed to how did Dubai College get an outstanding? Sorry. So I'll just take one from the back.
I just want to know, in terms of the paperwork that was produced by BSO and DSIB, was it 2 separate reports you were sent? And if so, how similar were they?
Very similar.
Okay.
So the debrief went as they always do. They go down through all the sort of the standards and the criteria. If there was a variation, and there were a few variations between what the British inspector wanted, they would sort of politely put their hand up and say, we need to interrupt here. But the actual report itself, the hard paper copy, very, very similar.
And were all the judgments on the things that were the same, curriculum, learning and teaching, were they all the same across the board?
They were all the same across the board, apart from where the BSO are not looking at Islamic studies or Arabic. But in everything else, they concurred. There was no discrepancy. And we also thought that the British inspection weren't going to rate the various areas. We thought it was just going to be standard met.
Yeah.
But and the report's on the website, the British report's on the website. But if you go down through, they've rated everything exactly the same way as KHDA or the SIP.
Thank you.
So the formal reports are 2 different ones, or is it
2 different ones.
combined one?
No,
2 different.
2 different ones. We've got a BSO one on the website and a KHDA one on the website.
I was just wondering, from the KHDA perspective, have you been an outstanding school? 2 questions. Like, are you an outstanding school? I just don't know. And were you in the past with KHDA? And what do you think more from a teacher, not a managerial, so not as much as policies? Have you made drastic changes, or what could you say to us to kind of get to that outstanding in the KHDA?
Sure.
A lot of questions.
This is the 3rd time that we have been awarded outstanding by the DSIB, by the KHDA definitions. The first couple or 3 years, I can't remember how many inspections we've had altogether. This is the 6th in the cycle, so we're 3-3. 3-3 from that point of view. Outstanding schools. Outstanding schools recruit outstanding students with parents who are outstandingly positive about education, and recruit outstanding teachers, treat the children outstandingly well on a daily basis. Part of our Britishness, I think, is that we are a please and thank you school. We do hold doors open for one another. We do actually offer to carry loads. Sometimes I'm staggering around at this stage of the year with heavy trays of examination papers, and the students come running up to me and say, "Can I help?" And I'm thinking, "No, but not let these examination papers out of my hands," etc. So, you know, what the inspectors did say informally afterwards was, this is more British than a British school. I think they were trying to say that basically we'd replicated the best aspects of British education here in the middle of the Dubai heat and the Dubai desert. Sorry, Colette, you were going to
Well,
develop
from
something?
one of the things, or one of my personal beliefs in terms of how do we get outstanding, obviously we get it from the children, from the students, because I can go in and teach a rubbish lesson, and quite often, you know, they're not jumping off the chairs, but they have an outstanding ability to learn, and if you can just tap into that, then everything else kind of falls in place. They're jumping out of the chairs to get into the school, they're jumping out of the chairs to learn, and just harnessing that. And for me as a teacher and as a member of SLT, it's that due respect, that collegiate. I don't dictate to the students. And we never raise our voices. No member of staff ever raises his voice in our school, and I think that breeds a culture of mutual respect, and kids are keen in. But that's just anecdotal. But that's the British inspection report. Those are their standards, exactly the same as DSIB standards. And they go on then to comment individually. But again, it's on our website. So if you want to look at the criteria and how they're judging and how they're feeding back, it's there. Again, we have to publish it. So it doesn't matter what you get, you have to publish it. They're very much about keeping things transparent in the British system.
Have you ever experienced, a surprise check?
Not here, but in my past at home, yes. A focused inspection unannounced on non-specialist teachers teaching, and I'm an English specialist, and I was teaching history. So, not here, but elsewhere.
This is in the public domain. This is what we paid the £2,000 for from Robin Watts, the child protection man from Kidscape. Basically, this policy came through, and we more or less took it as it was. Some of the way through there's a bit about the local area and the provision within the local area, etc. And of course, it's not very much compared to the United Kingdom, where there are backup social agencies. And it's in that section that I think I do actually refer to the Wadima case, which has obviously provoked situations here. It's very interesting that at one point during the inspection service, I had a message from the headmaster. Would I contact the inspector? Gave me the name. When I contacted the inspector, he said, "Martin, I've looked through all the documentation and it's tremendous. Where did you get your child protection policy stuff from?" So I said, "Well, from Robin Watson Kidscape." He said, I've been at Robin for ages. There's one thing that needs to be changed in there. And he said, it goes through and says, if there is a complaint, then you go to the headmaster. If there is a complaint, you go to the headmaster. If there's a complaint, you go to the headmaster. I've been telling him for years that he should have something in there which says, if the complaint is against the headmaster, you go to a member of the Board of Governors. So that's an amendment that is in there. And that was something that was done whilst the inspection was taking place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.